High class, Chapter 11, social problems, environment, energy, and the military-industrial complex. We live in a modern industrial society, and there has been a process to get us from where we were in pre-industrial society to where we are today. But there has been a cost to the environment. There has been human costs. There has been a cost to the ozone layer of the earth. There have been many costs that have added to the problem of pollution and environmental problems within our society. There are numerous costs to the process of production. There are byproducts. There is waste. And these have had a significant cost to the natural environment, to wildlife, and they have had human impacts. The Environmental Protection Agency was formed in 1970 to monitor these activities. It has to do with the assessment, research, and education in the area of environmental protections. What the EPA investigates, also what the EPA assesses and evaluates has to do with both environmental impacts, that is on the natural environment, the physical environment, wildlife, and then also social impacts. You know, there are social impacts to the industrial process. There are social impacts to the development of roads and bridges and dams. And so all of these have impacts that the EPA is responsible for documenting, for assessing, evaluating its impacts upon the natural, physical, and on the human environment. Pollution is a significant problem in our society. There are a number of hazardous chemicals and byproducts as a result of mass production and industrialization. And one of the problems that we experience with some of this pollution is the depletion of the ozone layer. Our ozone layer protects us from the ultraviolet rays of the sun that are harmful to human beings. And so with the depletion of the ozone, it has had a significant effect upon problems like global warming, the incidences of skin cancers, and the exposure to radiation. We have insufficient systems in our society for the disposal of waste and to protect the health and safety of the citizens of the United States. We have air pollution, we have fumes that are going up in the air. I used to work for a company, and we had systems in order to control the amount of pollution that went into the air. We had these big towers, and we would allow some of the material to come through it. We would mix it with lime, water, and steam, and we would basically strip the toxins out of the material, and clear smoke would come out the top. And that was a way to protect the air. We would take the solid waste and we would actually put it in settling ponds. And after it sets in these settling ponds over time, it became inert. It had no toxic properties or the ability to be harmful to the water. And then also there's soil pollution. Soil pollution is where there are toxic chemicals that seep into the soil. They affect wildlife. They also affect vegetation. One of the factors that contributes to pollution in society is energy consumption. The United States uses a significant amount of the world's energy, particularly when it comes to fossil fuels like oil. 1/4 of the world's energy is used every year by the United States. Per capita, the United States consumes twice as much as Great Britain and Japan, 12 times as much as China, and 85 times more than countries like Bangladesh. So we have a high level of consumption in this society, and that consumption leads to problems in the environment. This level of consumption has significant impacts upon the environment, and some of them are very difficult to address, and some of them will take many years to reverse their effects. In the 1970s, there was an energy crisis, and that was created basically by OPEC nations like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq, who control the overwhelming majority of oil imports and exports. The United States is heavily dependent upon fossil fuels from other countries around the world. However, we are becoming less dependent upon the world supply of oil. The U.S. Energy Information Administration reports that we are significantly less dependent upon imports of foreign oil today. In 2005, we were at 60% imports, and today, in 2011, 45%. So we are significantly less dependent upon the world's supply of fossil fuels than we have historically. There are also alternative fuels. There are biofuels. There are fuels that are available that do not have a detrimental effect upon the environment. Federal Research and Development, however, examines these alternative fuels. The overwhelming amount of research goes to nuclear energy. A small amount of the research, unfortunately, goes to renewable sources of energy like solar, wind, and geothermal energy. Solar energy relies upon the sun, the wind. We rely upon the wind currents, windmills, and the geothermal is that the earth naturally has its own geothermal forces that can produce energy in power plants. There's a movement referred to as the Green Power Movement. These are advocates. It started in the 1970s. These are advocates for the use of renewable energy. And this would have a very positive effect upon the natural environment and upon the human population. Nuclear power provides a significant amount of waste and harm to the environment. There are 61 nuclear power plants in the United States today, and there are nearly 100 nuclear reactors. And nuclear energy is very expensive, it's dangerous, it's toxic, and it's unsustainable. It's very difficult in order to produce nuclear energy. Much of the uranium that comes from different parts of the world. Some of it comes from Nigeria and Africa. They take this material, the uranium, and then they have to bring it to a grade that is able to be used in nuclear reactions. The nuclear waste is extremely toxic and radioactive, and today there are no clean methods of producing nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is produced two ways. One is by fission. Fission is the splitting of an atomic nuclei that creates large amounts of energy that can be used in power. And then we have what's known as nuclear fusion, which is the combining of two nuclei that has the same effect of creating large amounts of energy. When I was in the Marines, I taught a course called NBC, Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Warfare. And during the 1960s, there was the threat of a nuclear war. And so the military has trained its soldiers on how to deal with a nuclear threat. Nuclear weapons are very, very powerful, and the nuclear weapons today are much more powerful than the two weapons used in World War II against Japan. We dropped two nuclear bombs, one on Nagasaki, the other one on Hiroshima, and they were about 2 weeks apart. They were warned, and some of the things that they believed about the nuclear explosion, about what would actually result in a nuclear explosion, were ill-informed. Most of the destruction happens within about 90 seconds. 90 seconds. There's the initial blast, and then everything goes in every direction. The blast goes in every direction, and about 30 seconds more, it comes back together and creates the mushroom cloud. There are a number of ways that this nuclear explosions can be harmful to you. One is by looking at it. If you look directly at a nuclear blast, within 10 miles, you will be permanently blinded. Another thing that's detrimental from a nuclear explosion is the concussion. Just the shaking of the nuclear blast itself can kill people. Another thing is the thermal energy, the heat. It just disintegrates the air and the moisture around it. And then finally, there is the radiation and the nuclear fallout. So these are very destructive forces, and today we're continuing to explore more safe and healthy ways of producing nuclear energy. Another issue in our society that contributes to major threats to the physical environment and to our human populations is what's known as the military-industrial complex. President Dwight Eisenhower in the 1950s warned us about this industry that revolved around war, the research and development into weapons, the production of things that support the military. When I was in the military, there was an acronym called Beans, Bullets, and Band-Aids. So everything that had to do with the military had to do with food, beans, bullets, weapons, and Band-Aids, medical. So every major contract that supports the military is part of this military-industrial complex, and it's big business. There are significant profits that are garnered by military contractors who provide all of the needs for the military. There are corporations that attempt to get defense contracts from the U.S. Department of Defense and the federal government. They lobby Congress and they lobby politicians in order to get these lucrative military contracts. The military-industrial complex misuses the military and is more profit-driven than dealing with issues like national security, which are very legitimate issues in our society, but becomes more driven by capitalist interest rather than by the actual purpose of the military itself. War is big business today. In 2017, the U.S. spent $818 billion in military spending. It is a very, very expensive proposition, but also has the problem of threatening our physical environment, also in terms of threatening our human population. Finally, I want to talk about how that race, class, and the problem of the environment converge. Poor people, racial minorities are more likely to be exposed to pollution. They live in heavily populated areas. There are areas that are low income. There are a number of rural areas in society that are more likely to be victimized by the toxic waste dumps around the country. People are compensated to allow corporations to dump toxic waste in their communities and in their environments. There is a movement called NIMBY, N-I-M-B-Y, which means not in my backyard. And it is a way that neighborhoods organize themselves to resist the dumping of toxic waste near populated areas. There have been areas where there have been higher incidences of cancer. The water supplies have been affected by the toxic waste. There are tribes, Native American tribes, have been exposed to radioactive and other hazardous waste materials on Native American lands. The tribes negotiate with corporations to dump their waste on tribal lands for millions of dollars. And so it is big business, but at the same time, it has significant threats to the environment and to the population. The risk to health and safety outweigh the financial gain from toxic waste dumps. If you have any questions about the environment or the political, the military-industrial complex, or about energy, the energy crisis, email me, dmonk@se.edu.